All right, here we go. Welcome everybody to our speaker series from the Emerging Technology Research and Creativity Lab at Oklahoma State University. We've been having these monthly series on the last Wednesday of each month at this hour. And today we are very excited to have Dr. Maha Bali from American University in Cairo. She is with the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo, and I have followed her work for a while now. I love the way she thinks about technology, about equity issues, and so on. So we're really looking at highlighting a global conversation on creativity and emerging technologies. We are very excited to have Dr. Bali with us, and she will be talking to us about emerging technologies for equity that are focused on learning. So I'm a terrible person at doing introduction. So, and I also know that you have a very long video that we can spend a long time discussing, but maybe in your opening, if you could just tell a little bit more about yourself, about your work, and then we can go on to our conversation. So again, welcome.
Thank you, Seleni, for having me, and you've been inspiring me as well. So it's a real honor to be invited to do this, and thanks to everyone who made it today. And don't worry, and I always introduce myself in my talks anyway, so there's going to be that. and I think it's a cozy group, so I'd also like to hear from everyone, those joining virtually and those in the room, hopefully. So I'm going to share my screen, but I'll be sharing it on and off to be able to come back to Zoom and have people type or speak. So, is it sharing yet? You guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, great, thank you. All right, so this is me. This is my email address and my Twitter handle. And when I start, I like to show the different dimensions of myself. And I'm going to ask people in the room to tell me what they have in common with me in all of these things. So I'm an educator, I'm a teacher, I'm a researcher, I'm a writer. I have a blog that I write a lot in, and I write a lot of other things too. I'm a mom. I'm a mooker. I'm a lifelong learner. I tweet a lot, and I work in the ed tech field a lot. I worry a lot. And I think more important than anything, I'm a lifelong learner. In my work at the Center for Learning and Teaching at AUC, I'm a faculty developer, but I also teach a course on digital literacies, and I used to teach a course on creativity about educational game design. And I'm also the co-founder of something called Virtually Connecting, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and I just want to know something small about everyone else who's joined us. Are there collaborative notes? So that's a good question. Daniela's asking in the chat, are there collaborative notes? My slides are open to commenting, so I'll just put the link to my blog post that has the slides, and then you can open them from there and comment. I think that would help. But if you want to type something in the chat or speak up. Oops.
I'll also create a Google Doc just in case, so if people want to share notes that way.
Okay, sure, no problem. But while we're here, I just want to know a little bit about what everyone's role is and what kind of things we have in common. So.
Well, I'll get started here. I'm Penny Thompson. I'm an educational technology faculty member here at Oklahoma State University.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ayo Ibukun. So this is my second semester in the PhD program at Educational Technology. So my interest concerning equity is just to know how the digital divide play between rural and urban kind of setting. So thank you for coming.
Hi, I'm Tammy, and I bumped into this presentation. So my name is Tammy, and I'm from Nigeria. I'm actually in the curriculum studies program. I'm doing a PhD. I actually took a class with Dr. Asino on educational technology mobile technologies in the classroom. So I don't really have much experience as you guys in the field of education technology, but the discussions are interesting. Thank you for having me.
I am Travis Hartfield, and I am an adjunct instructor in the Educational Technology Department. I teach a couple of sections of educational technology to our emerging teachers, as well as I have a huge love for how emerging technologies and creativity can enhance and better an overall health and wellness view.
Would be great to hear from virtual folks if they can speak. I know some people might not be able to do that.
Hi, I can go. Hi, I'm Daniela. I'm a Mozilla Fellow for Science. I'm a neuroscientist. I relate to you and some of you all in the room, perhaps I'm a researcher, early career researcher at this point, just finished my PhD, and I'm really interested in kind of making better tools, but also bringing people together for new innovative ways of doing sharing research and publications, and specifically developing these tools in a way that they're not just reinforcing existing power structure and serving the global north. So I don't know much about education, but I'm really honored to be here and hearing from you all. Thanks.
Sandra, do you want to go next? Does your mic work? Or if you're not comfortable, you can type, whatever. Okay.
There you go. Hi, I'm Sandra Rogers. I'm at Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama. And I'm the instructional designer here and part of AECT. So I'm reading the book, the Culture, Learning, and Technology book that is published by AECT. So basically here to learn more about how I can address this with the instructional design that I do on campus.
Thank you. Jonathan, you want to go next, and then I'll read out what Kathy wrote.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Ports. I started as a mathematics professor, and I did a lot of open source software when I was younger, and so I sort of always think that the open source world is going to solve all of our problems, but unfortunately it's also caused so many other problems. And I guess I love reading the things that Maha has to say. It reminds me a little bit of a philosophy class I took as an undergraduate. It's like the philosophers are great at tearing apart things, and I feel so disturbed afterwards. I kept wanting to tell them, tell me what the answer is. I want the answer. And so I think Maha has written things that I find incredibly disturbing and really make me very uncomfortable. And so I'm seeking out to hear more from her to try to figure out how to get back to my comfort zone through the difficulty. But
I'm laughing as you say this because you're not the first person who likens me to some philosophy type of thing, and I'm so intimidated by philosophy. Like I find a lot of difficulty reading philosophy. I enjoyed my class in school in undergrad, but anyway, thank you for that. And hopefully disturbing enough to keep reading, but not to turn people off.
No, it's great. It's a disturbing in a really good way.
And Kathy S. Miller is an OER librarian and a PhD student in EdTech. I think she's one of Tulani's. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. And
there's a link to the Google Doc in the chat window if you want to take some collaborative notes.
Yeah. All right. So the first part is who I am, and this is just where I belong. And I think I really belong on the internet. I live a very big part of my life on the internet. So even though I will critique a lot of things about the internet, I have to admit that it's also, in other ways, helped me have a voice and helped me have a say. So even as we critique it, I think we need to also recognize, the good it's done for each of us. Now, I don't know if you've seen this image before or if you've seen something similar to it. I hope you can all actually see it. I have right now, I can see you guys on the right, my right-hand side, and I can still see that image. And there are images similar to it that usually have people looking out at a baseball field. But when I first wanted to use it like that in my classes, I realized most of us here in Egypt don't watch baseball. So it's just an image of someone watching something, but we don't know what it is. And it also, sometimes they're all white. And so this image is more color neutral, and it has an agricultural example. So I just want to know what this image, does it bring something in particular to mind? What does it make you think of? Is there a way for me to see the chat while? I don't think so. So
I think
yeah, please.
Yeah, I think notifications, if someone does chat, but I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure it out in my mobile. What I think one of the differences in the one you shared and the one where people are watching the ball game is that this shows people trying to access a needed good. I mean, it's not just a ball game; it's food.
Right, I agree. Go ahead.
Yeah. This picture is so much better than that one. I love the other one too, with the football thing, but it's something that I've been thinking a lot recently because I kept talking about equality, and then I started thinking about like how unfair the whole equality thing is. And so what I always imagine this is like, oh, now we can all like race, but some of us start like 10 miles behind, and so even though we're all starting at the same time, so it's definitely something that I'm trying to inject in a lot of my thinking. So it's a great image.
I usually see this image, and I think that the one on the right is what education should be about, helping people reach their goals, and us sort of scaffolding as educators in whatever ways that we can. Whereas the one on the left is sadly often what education is currently, where we seem blind to the different diversities in our students.
I think one of the things about learning outcomes is that they usually don't differentiate. So that, I found how to chat, by the way. I can see, I'll read out what I've seen there in a second. But yeah, I think with learning outcomes, we decide that everyone needs to reach the apple, but then doesn't take into account of how tall each one is. And what I think is also interesting about the one on the left is that the person in the middle is jumping up. So he has agency. So he doesn't have as much resources as the really tall one, but he has the agency to try to jump, and maybe some people will be able to jump really high, and that's okay then. They struggle a little bit more, but they reach it. But then the yellow guy, the short one, he's not even trying. He's given up because it's so far ahead of him. And so all that talk about grit and resilience and all of that doesn't take account of those factors of, how much agency does a person have, but also how much does their background prevent them from even seeing the opportunities. Jonathan was saying, I'm sad to lose the word equality, but maybe the left is equality infrastructure and the right is equality of opportunity. I love that. I don't think anyone's ever put it that way. I like what you thought here, Jonathan. And I think there was Laura Chernovich from the University of Cape Town talks about the difference between equality of access and equality of outcomes. So if we can get equality of access but not equality of outcomes, then that's an issue, right? And someone mentioned the digital divide earlier, and the divide is a spectrum, because the world now is not only haves and have-nots, but how much you have and how well you have it. So, for example, a lot of countries have internet infrastructure, but how long does the electricity work for how many hours a day? Or how fast is that internet? Or how surveilled is that internet? And even like within the US, someone like Chris Gilliard talks about digital redlining, where there are areas that don't get very good internet, that have more surveillance, community colleges that aren't as well funded, where students have less access to resources. They have more, I don't know what it is, but I think like more things that are banned that students don't get to see and things like that. So it's always useful for me to think about that. And then one of my students once saw this image and said, well, why does someone give me the answer? Why does someone give me the solution? Why don't we equip students to find their own solution, but give them the time and the resources and then let them choose how they want to reach the apple? And there's also the question of they're all eating apples, but maybe they don't all want apples. So this is one issue, is that the image assumes that we want equity for an outcome that someone else has decided is important, but that's not necessarily the outcome I want. There was a case of a beggar here in Egypt. Someone gave her an apple once, and she swore at them because she has no teeth, so she can't eat the apple. So the person gave her the apple, thought they were being generous and doing something useful, but actually it didn't work for her. She couldn't do anything with it. There's also one of the things that has influenced me recently, I think Kathy was involved in a couple of the sessions where we were talking about this, is Nancy Fraser's model of social justice, where she talks about dimensions of social justice as economic, cultural, and political. And with something like open education, for example, a lot of times the arguments being made relate to the economic aspects of giving students textbooks for free. And obviously this is important for students who can't afford the textbooks. But then there are also infrastructural issues of why there are economic issues. So you could solve the problem on the surface or you can go deeper. So if you're solving a problem on the surface, they call it ameliorative. But if you're really solving the infrastructural issue, they're calling it transformative. So there's a difference between giving someone a device versus improving the infrastructure of the country so that everyone has good internet access, for example. And an intervention that we do in order to enhance social justice may be transformative for a certain group of people, but be negative or neutral for other groups of people or in certain contexts. So again, I mean, things like what we're doing right now, it gives some kind of equity in the sense that we have access to each other even though we're in very different parts of the world. Some of us, like myself, don't travel a lot, so this is an opportunity to meet people and have this discussion. But then if I didn't have internet at all where I live, then it would not be helpful me in any way. For other people who get to travel a lot and get to see these things a lot, it's nice, but it's not like a transformative experience. Like you could probably go to a lot of conferences and listen to similar things and it wouldn't have the same. So over here I have a link to an article about decolonizing open where we explain this quite briefly if somebody would like to look at that a little bit more, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. And the key thing with Nancy Fraser is the political aspect is about who has power to make decisions about something. Just before we went live, we were talking about artificial intelligence and the kinds of things you can do remotely, that kind of thing. And there was a recent Doha debate about artificial intelligence, and one of the key things that's wrong with open source and artificial intelligence, a lot of technology, is who gets to participate in the design of technologies, who gets to decide how technologies will be used. And if there isn't parity of participation from diverse groups of people, particularly marginalized people, then any technology or any educational technology, therefore, is bound to recreate or reproduce inequality and inequity. So one of the images I use, and Tsalini, I'm sorry you've seen some of these before, but I like using them and people tend to like them, is this idea of who's table and who has a seat, which gets used a lot. And I love this quote from Shirley Chisholm, who's I think the first African-American congresswoman or senator. And I think she also ran for presidency at some point. And she says, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. But I look at this picture and how would you feel bringing a folding chair to this table? How would it make you feel? Anyone want to just give a quick comment on that?
I really love that because it's, I wouldn't bring a folding chair to that table. I'm not welcome. I'll feel like I'm standing out. So, so for me, it's, I thought about it differently than that, but I think this is much more vivid because we tend to say that we are open and welcoming, and then really we don't take a look at how that room looks like and if it's actually inviting.
Exactly. And so a lot of times when we bring someone to a table, we bring diverse people to a table that's already set. It's already got its rules. It's already got everything on it. You can't do anything differently, but you're just this different person in the midst of people who are otherwise identical. And so, for example, if you're in a conference and you're doing an organizing committee and you bring one woman, one gay person, one black person, one international person, so that's 4, and then the other 4 are all white males. Like you've just brought token people, put them together with the majority, just doing the same things that you've been already doing, but inserting them into that, so they have to adapt to it, so then you don't have as much room to change. I was an undergraduate computer science student. I was the highest honor student, but people still thought because I was a woman that I must know less than all the guys in my class. And I eventually left because I just got sick of, I finished my degree, I worked in IT for 2 years, and I'm like, you know what, like no matter what I do, they're still gonna think I'm not competent, so there's no point in staying there. And also the way that the field was designed in ways that were less cooperative, which I thought didn't make sense. It made sense that we work together, and for some reason in Egypt, this was not happening in my school. So this is another example. I like this image because of the mismatched chairs. And I kind of feel, you can bring a folding chair to this one, right? You wouldn't feel like you're sticking out because everyone looks different anyway. But other people see it and they say, oh no, they're too close together and maybe that's not very comfortable. And they're all facing front, they're not facing each other. So perhaps it's good for some things, but maybe not for others. Feel free to interrupt me anytime. I see there are some things in the chat. So I'm just gonna take a... Yes, inclusion versus equity. So these images are more about, I think, inclusion, but also that what I said about parity of participation. So inclusion is about participating, and then equity is about the parity of that participation, that when you're in the situation and participating, you're not including someone but not giving them equitable decision-making power, for example. All right.
I think too, if you had to bring the folding chair, you'd be tired once you got there from carrying the folding chair. And, as opposed to all the other people that just got to come and sit down. We want the folks to be fresh and relaxed and rested and have a chance to share their ideas.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So you're saying in a folding chair, what would the folding chair be like in that analogy?
Oh, just I think the extra burden
right, carrying your own chair rather than going and finding something ready for you. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And some of us will do that. I think I, as a person, do fight my way into things because I realize that if I don't do that, I won't get it. But you shouldn't have to, just because you're a minority, have to do that. It's an extra burden that majority dominant people don't need to do. And so to recognize that effort. This one, this image, people say it looks more relaxing. What I kind of like about it is that they're different, but they have something in common. So it feels to me a bit like sort of a community of practice or something where they do have something in common. Not everyone would feel comfortable there, but people who there will find themselves and be able to work comfortably together. And one of the things is that diversity is hard work. A lot of times we talk about diversity as, yay, let's do diversity. And once you have it, you're done. But actually, once you have diverse people in the room, to make it actually work and to get the best out of it, it's a lot of work all the time as we all learn to work together. And there are different diversities, right? Which I'm going to talk about in a second as well. And how do you take that into account when you're designing a learning experience and when technology comes into it? What kind of things do you have to keep in mind? This is people sitting and eating on the floor, which happens in some Arab countries, in rural areas and desert areas. And that's something that maybe is comfortable for them, may feel really uncomfortable for others. When I talked to my students about it, they said, in contexts where I'm in an area in the desert camping, and this is the way people over there eat, this is comfortable, but I wouldn't be comfortable doing it at home, for example. And it's also one of those things where you think about disability. So if someone has a disability, they can't sit on the floor cross-legged. But if someone is a child, they're on the same level as everyone sitting on the floor, versus with adults, you have to get them a high chair and you have to do special arrangements. But if everything's on the floor, then everyone who can sit on the floor are on equal level. And then there's the campfire example, which a lot of people use to indicate friendly and so on. But for some people, maybe that's you're sitting too close, or they're afraid of the fire, it feels too hot. But then for other people, this is a comfortable place to be. And I realized after using this image a few times is that I've never been in a campfire situation. I've never camped. And yeah.
I think all these images for me also bring home the point of when we try to be inclusive, and at the same time we're actually fostering some of those things, but how we're excluding at the same time. I was at a session where someone was doing diversity and was asking people to stand up when every time she says something that attached to that person, to show that we all have things in common. Except there were people in the room who were in wheelchairs.
Right. Oh my God.
That just wasn't, it was really meant well, and the conversation was good, but that example kind of just excluded certain people from conversation.
If she had said, raise your hand.
Yes.
Unless people had paralysis, it would have been okay. Yeah. You're less likely to have someone who's paralyzed than someone who's on a wheelchair, or just an elderly person for whom getting up and sitting down a lot can be difficult. Yeah. I have rheumatoid arthritis, so it's a minor disability sometimes when I'm in a time where it's not working well for me, and it just made me really, really aware of those little things that you see a young person, you don't imagine that maybe something might be physically difficult for them. And so, yeah. This one then, who's excluded from this kind of place that maybe for some people is really friendly?
People who don't drink.
People who don't drink, and people who don't drink is like a wide range of people, right? So practicing Muslims and maybe religious people of different religions, people below a certain age, people who are recovering alcoholics, right? And one of the things that happens in a lot of situations, I see this a lot on Twitter, is people talk about socializing as let's go for a drink or something like that. It really excludes me when they talk about that, and it's kind of like, are you not seeing that I'm right here? Like, you're just saying that means you're excluding me from all of this. I think there's like, hi Anelda. There are a lot of things, like you call a meeting something and you call as if people are gonna sit together and drink, and then some people don't even want to be in that situation even if they're not gonna drink. So thinking about those things and who would be excluded again from that. So back to what I was saying earlier, when I introduced myself, I wanted to show different dimensions of myself. And I think because we are multidimensional, when we think about creating learning experiences for our students, it's seeing the different dimensions of them. And there's obviously personality and a lot of things that are not related to power and oppression. But I really like this matrix of oppression and thinking about intersectionality. Patricia Hill Collins talked about white supremacy as one factor, heteropatriarchy, so I guess that takes both sexuality and gender into one category, capitalism, obviously, social class, and so on, settler colonialism. And I like those four, but I also think it's missing a few, like ability versus disability, for example, is not anywhere here. Although I sometimes heteropatriarchy, sometimes say, well, heteronormative, and then just like anything that's seen as normal and everything else that's seen as less normal, whether it's ability, mental ability, that kind of thing. And so again, one of the things I think is when we're designing learning experiences, sometimes we'll notice one and be very strongly focused on making sure that one of them is addressed, but we might not always see all the others, and we might not see what it means when someone has both. Like a gender and a race minority together, and how that influences the end results. So it's important to keep those things in mind. And Sasha Costanza-Chalk works on design justice. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but I think it's a really cool way of applying, a lot of justice, a more, formal justice framework to designing, I think mostly IT kind of things. And how talking about single access evaluations of fairness will erase certain groups of people, and especially those who are marginalized. And here I'm just bringing up digital redlining again as a thing that is intentionally done by governments sometimes and by universities to make a difference between who has physical access to what and who gets surveilled, and who then, what kind of boundaries of race, class, ethnicity, and gender get reinforced by the ways technologies are used. And also the other, go ahead.
Is digital redlining different from digital divide?
Yes, so Chris Gilliard talks about that, right? So digital divide is about what you have. You either have the technology or you don't have the technology. And digital redlining is a thing that's being done intentionally by a government to not build infrastructure in a particular place, or to underfund a particular college, therefore it doesn't have the resources to do certain things. So in this article, if you click on that link, you'll get to see how he differentiates them. Another really interesting thing about digital divide as a spectrum is a work of Mark Warschauer. Now he writes a lot of things about this topic, but he's also research specific. Talks about the dimensions of the digital divide as not just being the access to the technology, but also the culture that you build around the use of technology and the human factor of that, and how in a lot of contexts you give people the device and then you don't do anything about helping the teacher develop new tools to use on the device, or use it pedagogically in useful ways, or make the culture of using technology as a learning tool more helpful than just let's read the same textbook on a tablet instead of reading it on paper.
Can you, sorry. Can you,
yeah, I can type it.
Yeah, thank you, sorry.
Mark Warschauer. Yeah, I don't mention him anywhere here, but it's because it came up. So he has this really good article based on research in Egypt called Dissecting the Digital Divide. And he talks about how it's not an on-off kind of thing, but a spectrum. And I was looking actually this morning about internet countries in Africa, because I was giving a talk and someone said, well, in some places in Africa, people don't have internet at all. And what I know is that, for example, some areas will have good internet and other areas will have internet, but then the electricity isn't on long enough. So you need to figure out ways to work asynchronously. Tosaleni must know a lot more about this than I do as well. I've heard him talk about it. I think I've heard Tosaleni talk about people learning about computers without having computers, right? That was last year?
Yes, yes.
So, the other one is also this idea of access to information in the first place, and access to accurate information, which I think is really important in the world we're at right now, because we always talk about that the internet is there, therefore you can learn anything, but you need to develop the digital literacy, obviously, to figure out what's accurate and what's not, and also the ways in which somewhere like Facebook controls what you see, and you think it's neutral, but it's not. It's actually deciding for you what you're going to see and what hides from you things that. And I think there's something called the dark something, where the dark posts or something, where they're ads, but you don't realize that they're ads, and nobody can track that you've seen them, but you see them and they send it out for political reasons. I think Zainab Tafiki talks about this. But also, of course, governments sometimes control what citizens have access to. So it's not like, all the kinds of control like in places like China and where I live, so that people can't actually, advocate for their interests as well. But this also will apply to educational technology when we use it. I'm going to talk about that as well. And I think, I don't think any technology by itself promotes or equity or not. I think, but who designs it may make it more liable to promote inequity or equity. But then we also get to decide how we're going to use it and who we give the power to make decisions about it, about how it's designed and whose perspectives we take into account when we design it. And so Cheryl Hodgkinson Williams and Henry Trotter, so they work at University of Cape Town, and they've done this, applying the social justice framework to open educational resources. And so, for example, it's one thing to say students will have access to textbooks, but then who wrote those textbooks that students are having access to? What kind of point of view are we giving them? Are the majority of open education resources exist in English? The majority of them are funded by Western institutions. Open educational resources are free to the user, but they're not free to create. So someone has to have the resources to actually work on creating them. And there have been projects, and they've worked on a project which is research on OER and for development in the Global South. And what they found is, for example, that a lot of educators will find anything that's free on the internet and use it. It doesn't matter what the license on it is, because licenses are not that important in this part of the world. And so if it's freely available online, they assume they can use it and do whatever they want with it. But for the most part, people don't have the digital literacy to adapt. And one of the benefits of an open educational resource is that you can revise it. And so if you're not going to revise it, and the other way is to translate it, but if you don't have the English, how are you going to read it in order to translate it? So there's all these different factors of thinking about how something that is meant to, in some ways, promote social justice, needs to be taken further to be a transformative kind of social justice. To take into account perspectives of others. So the revising part also has another dimension. So if someone from Nigeria, whose first language is English, right? They speak English, adapts some work that's been done in the US and inserts the African perspective into it, will someone in America ever read it? So it's one thing for the Nigerian folks to adapt it and use it and then benefit from it. But it's another thing for them to then put it out there and then have people from the West then incorporate those perspectives into theirs. And for the most part, I think that does not happen. And recently we were talking about, for example, would someone in Harvard be willing to adapt an open textbook that comes from the University of British Columbia in Canada if they think that, Harvard is much more prestigious? Would the students object? And I'll give another example from our context here at AUC. We've had projects with MIT where they came and gave us access to some of their MOOC content and access to sort of let our students do the quizzes for, within a smaller class, so it's not like part of the open MOOC. And sometimes the students were not happy with that. You would think they'd be happy to be taking MIT content, but they were actually like, well, this stuff is available for free online. Why are you giving it to us and making us pay for it? And we're like, you're still getting your class and you're getting your teacher and you're doing the problem solving in class. One of the problems was they gave it to us, but they didn't allow us to do a lot of adapting to it. We couldn't add our own content to it. We can only remove pages. We couldn't remove like one question at a time. And so when the teacher wanted to use like 3 questions from a quiz and one part of a page, they had to just tell students to skip things rather than to actually make it really revisable. And a lot of the coding of the courses were hard coded, so that it was very difficult to change things like the number of attempts that a student could do before the grade was put on, for example. So those are things that the design could have been better, and it wasn't. And the claim was like, look at, we're giving you this, that you can use it now, but you're giving it to us and we can't edit it. So yeah. Does anybody have any comments or questions before I move on to virtually connecting? Okay. Virtually connecting, this thing that I co-founded, started out because I have a young child who's older now, but when I started this, she was very young. I live over here in Egypt, and I do a lot of work online with a lot of people, and I couldn't go to a conference where I was co-authoring my presentations. And the thing for me is not the presentation, because I could record my part of the presentation or I could join live and join that, but I was missing out on the social dimension of it. And a lot of conferences live stream their keynotes and they live stream and people live tweet. But having that social interaction that builds your social capital, that was not something that I had access to. And so one of my friends, Rebecca Hogue, was at the conference. She said, I'll be your buddy. I'll connect you to people. And so I'd make appointments with people at this time. And then I decided, well, actually, you know what? Let's live stream these conversations and other people can join in and we can all be part of that conversation. And so ever since that one time we did it, this is our 3rd or 4th year now, is that we go to conferences, especially educational technology or education conferences, and we connect people to each other. So the idea of connecting for social justice in the sense that there's some marginal voices who can't make it to conferences for funding reasons, for social reasons, for health reasons, either because they're in the Global South or they are single parents or they're graduate students and they can't travel, or they're adjuncts and they don't have any funding to travel. And that's what it was for. And it's also fun. And there are also people who are part of the teams. We have a lot of volunteers. It's not just me and Rebecca. There's a lot of other people. Is that some of the people in our team are pretty high profile people as well. And they want to do this because they want to listen to the marginal voices when they're at a conference. So it's not that they do go to the conferences, they're fine with that, but they want to share that with others. So this is one of those things where I struggle again because it's transformative for some people, but not for others. In some ways, it reproduces the stardom of certain keynote speakers who are already famous and gets them to be on the screen more. But we also try, for example, to find lesser known voices who are at conferences and to bring them, to give them voice as well and to listen to them. And then also sometimes it could happen that you bring people together, but only the very high profile people dominate the conversation. Kind of like what I'm doing right now, I'm dominating the conversation. But usually with virtually connecting, it's a more balanced kind of conversation where nobody's presenting anything to anybody. And today I have to present a little bit. But in a virtually connecting, it's just a regular conversation. But then, just recently we were looking at a conference that's coming up soon. I think one of the keynote speakers is deaf. So we're trying to figure out how we can do a virtually connecting conversation with them. I think we might need someone who speaks sign language. I mean, he probably speaks, but he won't be able to hear, right? So I don't know if lip reading works well online. I don't know if we could get someone to do ASL, American Sign Language. I don't know what's going to work with that. Maybe we have someone on the team who does. And we've been talking about language, like anyone who doesn't speak English, again, won't easily be able to participate in a virtually connecting session. But in some very lucky situations, we've had bilingual volunteers who've helped us translate in these sessions as well. Jonathan, you look very pensive. I think you have an idea. We're just thinking, do you have something you want to share? Okay, just thinking about that.
I was just thinking about what, there are so many, I mean, I realize that reductio ad absurdum is kind of a silly argument to use sometimes, but I don't know, your example of suddenly having a deaf person that we need to be inclusive, and that suddenly puts a huge, you have to think hard about how to serve that person. I wonder, I'm always concerned, am I unintentionally excluding people, and how do we think about everyone? How, that's the part of the problem with the perspective is, we don't know our audience, particularly when we throw something out in the world as an OER, maybe we don't know who our audience is potentially enormous. And should I not, I don't know. It's troubling. I don't know how to be as
one of the things Helen Beetham once told me is, don't let your privilege paralyze you. So if you care, you still do what you can. But I think the key thing for me is having people on your team who have those backgrounds to suggest those solutions. So in Virtually Connecting, for example, we had one person from Iran, her name is Parisa Mehran, who had problems getting a visa to go to a conference. And she's now part of the team. She has a particular issue. And having someone with that particular issue and that particular perspective helps us do better at what we do. We have a lot of people who are adjuncts, a lot of people who are graduate students. And so they bring their context, and then they help us solve the problems from their perspective. So it helps a lot to actually just not think about the imaginary person, but actually bring that person onto your team. And there will be like 9 million different intersectionalities out there. So it's quite difficult to account for all of them. But as you start to notice them, I think starting to bring them in helps a little bit. Daniela, you're unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. So specifically for the deaf person, so one of my best friend and also collaborator in the lab, he's a postdoc, and he is deaf, and so we're always like trying to figure out ways to help. And he's an incredible teacher. He's like the best programmer and like able to actually teach. And we taught a class together, and we were like, I was working with him, and even if it's really hard for other people to understand him, we were trying to find solutions. So one thing that we're trying to do now is to there are some softwares. There is some software, but it's currently very bad, that can like live caption, do some live captions, but it's just completely out of context. So we are trying right now to feed into a model some of it like an auditory neuroscience specific talk that we are like typing in, and then trying to like train the model to be better at. So it's just something we started like last week, because it's a really big concern. And again, I would have never thought about it unless I had that experience with him.
Right.
And it's something that, these abilities I think I have that are this time like even remembering, because I do get paralyzed by my privilege. It's like, oh my God, there are so many things I have no idea. But it's good to surround yourself with like people that can bring this perspective, and it's even that one is not the easiest. But I have one super quick question, and I'll read more about. I'm super intrigued by this. I haven't heard of it. Virtual connecting. So how do you said that these conversations are kind of more balanced? Like, how do you do at that exactly? And like, do you have like a strong code of conduct? Do you allow? You're wearing Mozilla Open Leaders, so like I really like those like.
Virtually Connecting was one of the Mozilla Open Leaders last year as well.
That's what it was. Okay, I think
some of them, but I can. It wasn't. I let some of our regional leads handle that. I wasn't in that. I was in another one. But anyway, so the way Virtually Connecting sort of does that balance is that we have two people on our team, two volunteers, an on-site person and a virtual person. The virtual person actually is the one who starts the Google Hangout. He's the one who invites everyone. And then the on-site person is the person who uses their laptop or their phone to connect people in the room. And the people in the room are the guests who are on-site at the conference telling the virtual folks about the conference. But the virtual buddy and the on-site buddy do what we call intentionally equitable hospitality. So where we're trying to be hospitable and welcoming to everyone, but with an equity focus, so that we don't allow the dominant person to over-dominate the conversation. And so sometimes, it also does depend on the privilege of the person who's the virtual buddy and the on-site buddy. Some people are just more timid than others. Some people have, most of the high profile people in the conference are people I can talk to, so I can actually critique them openly and I feel comfortable doing that. Other people don't. But we try to sort of model that and and try to make sure that people who are joining us virtually, if they want to speak up, that they can. If they want to type, we say what they've written. And try to make sure that the people in the room, for example, if there's this situation where you have 1 man and 3 women and the man talks all the time, we try to make sure that doesn't happen. The on-site person always says, are there questions from the virtual side? Because it could have the on-site people talk to each other and not to the virtuals. Because they're small pictures on a screen, right? So it's more of us, the more we experience it, the more we take care to balance it out. But what you were saying about the experience of working closely with someone, I think that's really what makes a huge difference, is when you work with someone who's different from you, as a minority in a different way, when you work really closely with them, it's very different than just being aware of the issue from a distance. And it really makes a difference if you know multiple people, because then you get to see the more generalizable experience rather than just that one particular person's experience. So I think it's helped me personally a lot when I've worked with people who are very different from me, to sort of understand where they're coming from. Now, Equity Unbound is one of the projects that we worked on with Mozilla Open Leaders as well. So this was, I teach a course on digital literacies and intercultural learning, and I've been teaching it for a while, and I realized that if we get into the idea of intercultural learning, we use technology to connect with people in different countries, but if we don't put equity in mind when we're doing this, and social justice and issues of bias and that kind of thing, then the experience is going to be quite superficial and kind of, oh, hi, like this is what we eat and this is what we do on holidays. But especially when you're connecting with technology, then there's the issues of who has a better access to the technology, whose internet's working better, whose culture is being so foregrounded in the experience. And so Equity was sort of meant to provide sort of resources to help people overcome that. And the idea was, I was working with, here in Egypt, and then working with Catherine Cronin in Ireland and Mia Zamora in New Jersey in the US, and creating learning experiences where people could interact with each other. There were educators as well as us and our students doing this. But I'll give an example of one activity that we did over here, which is, this is my daughter who's trying to tell me something. So, want to eat something? Okay, 5 minutes. Okay. We did a Twitter scavenger hunt thing where people get to talk to each other on Twitter and do things. But one of the activities involved sending a mystery image and asking people to guess what it is. And someone pointed out to us, well, you know, people have visual disabilities, the screen reader won't be able to tell them that. And what we did is we learned that Twitter allows you to give an alt text or description to every image that you put up there. And we realized that it's there, but it's not the default. So what we did is we did an open letter to Twitter to make it the default. And so you think, you know, you're doing something with the intention of equity, but you miss something like that, or you miss, you know, those color things for colorblind people. You start to realize these things as you go along. As long as you're flexible, that's to us what was key. Tutalini, you wanted to say something other than that my time is almost up?
I think just to follow up on what you just said, is that my first experience with issues of accessibility, I talk about this in my classes. Most accessibility features on most technologies require that you turn them on, which is really difficult for somebody who needs to use that tool, especially if they're visually impaired. So it just sort of makes it, you know, I like what you said, is that sometimes we do things with the intention of being equitable and recognizing the different abilities and diversity that we have. Yeah. But to sort of follow up with something that Daniela said earlier is, when you don't have the experience of working with, until you work with someone who has a different ability or different culture and so on, it's very hard to understand how they see the world until you have really been placed in that context.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, you know what? Speaking of that, I'm just going to go back a slide because the slide of virtually connecting has a clock there, because I was talking about time zones, which I didn't bring up. But everyone who works with virtually connecting is highly hyper aware of time zones. And they're aware, for example, that Maha usually prefers to go to do sessions at night after her daughter has slept. and that we should maybe give times in UTC rather than in Eastern time, because there are times when the US and the UK change time zones at different times, and places like Egypt that don't change time zones. So we have a time zone converter on our website so that you can always see what time it is on your local time zone. And so there are all these little things that they start to become, you sort of have like a time zone literacy or time zone sensitivity thing that you wouldn't normally do if you don't work with people in different countries all the time. And you still make mistakes, but it's just, you're more aware of this issue. It's not like a tangential thing. I see people writing in the chat about live captions. I hope they get better. YouTube has, not live captions, but if anything is on YouTube, you can turn on the closed captions, but it has the problem of being obviously accent biased. So if you don't have a very native accent, even if you're like Irish, I think it won't get it. You need to be American or British or sort of a mid-Atlantic accent like mine, it would be fine. But then with other stuff, it just goes completely. The same thing with something like Google Translate. It works well, I think, between Latin languages, but it doesn't work well with Arabic, for example, at all. I'm just going to give another example of something that I think is a technology like Hypothesis, which allows collaborative annotation, and then how you can use it for equity, which is marginal syllabus. So they pick topics that are about equity and social justice, and they try to have the authors interact with people who are talking about it. So it gives this open opportunity to talk to an author. And so that's a kind of technology that you could use in an equitable or not an equitable way, because you could use Hypothesis to annotate someone's website and just swear at them, right? You could do that, and there's nothing to stop you, really. Well, there is, you can report it, but you know. Anyway, I wrote an article with Autumn Keynes about faculty development and promoting equity and agency in faculty development with connected learning. So if you'd like to check that out, that's also in the slides. And I also remembered the work of Paul Prinsloo, who's also from South Africa, and about something like learning analytics, which a lot of our institutions do with the learning management system. And he was talking about that we should maybe think of decolonizing them and how learning analytics may reproduce epistemic violence and injustice and inequality in the ways they look at students and quantify them, and where students don't have agency in how their data is going to be used. And of course, we were talking about AI again and thinking about Safiya Noble's work on algorithms of oppression and the ways that algorithms, and again, reproduce inequality. So when we're using this kind of thing, I think it's important to be aware and to also think of ways to change that. So this is me for now. I'm going to stop sharing. And I'd be happy to take any questions. We started 5 minutes late, so I can stay 5 more minutes if folks want.
Let me just say thank you, Maha, so much for the presentation. You've given us a lot of stuff to think about. I don't even know really where to start. One, I feel bad that we're robbing you of cuddling time and bedtime stories probably at this point. But I think the one thing that I really wanted to follow up on is something that you said earlier. It seemed you didn't say this, but I think what I took away is that you're arguing that current structure of OER could be sort of replicating this global knowledge dissemination or hegemony, because
yes,
there's not really a back and forth.
Yeah. So even though there's a potential for it, so there's more potential for it than, for example, with traditional textbooks, obviously. But for the most part, the people who are writing the OERs, it's getting better, obviously, because there are some places, I think, like the Commonwealth of Learning have done things, and where it takes longer to do a participatory OER, where, for example, teachers are designing their content and designing what is important, what isn't. But we're still nowhere near that.
Any other questions?
So I just have a quick question. I don't know if it's quick or not, but anyway, I'm gonna try to be quick. Basically, so I mentioned before that I co-founded a project called Pre-Review, and we're trying to kind of change the makeup of scientific peer review and who is actually who is an expert and how those are judged, and we're trying to do that by using preprints as a kind of a test bed for this review and allowing for crowdsource and all of this. Like initially that I thought it was going to be like, you know, just a side project. It's like it's become like, because I did this huge kind kind of mountain just to look at, because in order to be truly inclusive, we started doing like sprints and talking to people. It was like, there are so many ways that this can go wrong. And this can just like be yet a new platform for the biggest monkey to shout with a louder voice. And so definitely like connections with like talks like this, and connections with the Mozilla community, OpenCon, and other people that have been put in contact have helped. But I've been trying to like also think about this and like writing grants and opportunities to put all these people together. And I don't know. I guess I'm not looking for confirmation, but kind of. What paralyzes me is that I don't want to be. I may necessarily not be that person, or me or my team, to do this work in the right way. So how can, and I've been trying to reach out, like how can we actually effectively partner and bring in a leadership that is actually diverse, so that we're not being like neo-colonizer and say, hey, first of all, is this even a solution? Because I think, some people were like, well, we don't actually believe in preprints. So like this whole idea of using preprints is not going to work. So do you have tips? So like, I'm definitely going to check out your resources.
I wrote an article called A New Scholar's Perspective on Open Peer Review. Mm-hmm. So it used to be openly available, but it isn't anymore. I intentionally published it in a traditional journal to reach people who read traditional journals. Okay. But Hybrid Pedagogy as a journal have written a lot about that. They don't do crowdsourcing, open peer review. They do private open peer review, so that the author and the reviewers collaboratively help improve the article. So the goal is to improve the article, not to reject it, which I think a lot of journals, the point is to reject a lot of articles so that you're rigorous, right? So, but then that ends up definitely, it's not fair to younger scholars or Global South scholars. I think when I peer review articles from people from Global South who are not native English speakers, just they can't express themselves well enough sometimes. But also the epistemic violence. I was trying to publish articles about collaborative autoethnography in EdTech, and people were like not understand at all what this methodology is. Right. And so we got rejected like 7 times, I think, before one of ours got published, because people didn't get it. Like the kind of feedback they give you, like they're expecting you to quantify something like really, really interpretive. So I would love to know more about your project. I think I've been through the experience of this crowdsourced open peer review thing that went okay, but definitely it can go really wrong, because it wouldn't person. But when someone, I think, very high profile, or not even high profile, does something really violent online, then it's actually everyone can see them do it. Now some people still do that in like conferences, and they're like really aggressive to other people, but it's probably less than they would have done if it was completely private and anonymous and nobody would have known they'd done it, I think. Yeah. So if you can't access this article that I'm referring to,
I'll reach out to you.
Send it to you. Yeah. I'm going to type in my email. It's also available in the slides.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for doing this, because this really, really matters. I think epistemic injustice, peer review is definitely one of the gatekeepers of this kind of thing. And it's, I'm so happy that someone's working on it on like this broader scale. So thank you.
Other questions, comments?
We're good here. Thank you.
Well,
hey, thank you.
And thank you very much, everybody, for participating. Dr. Bali, thank you as always. You always leave us things to think about. We will be posting this video shortly for anybody who wants to come back and relook. I think the links for the notes are on there. And hopefully you will be joining us again next month on the last Wednesday of May, where we'll have Najeri Richardson Carty from Anguilla, who will also be talking about creativity from a global perspective. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. And Daniela, I look forward to hearing back from you as well.
Will do. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, folks at Oklahoma. And thank you again to Talini for inviting me.
Thank you very much. I'll be following up with the email.
Inshallah. Okay. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good day.